Good evening. You're watching The Digital Age. I'm Jim Zirin. Tonight, we are going to talk about the state of professional sports in the United States. Until recently, sports was a $300 billion business. But with the downturn in the economy, the issue arises whether the sports bubble is about to burst. And here to discuss this issue with us and answer the question is a man whom Gentleman's Quarterly calls the best sports writer in the world. He's a regular morning commentator for National Public Radio's Morning Edition, six-time U.S. Sports Writer of the Year winner, the author of 17 books, the latest of which is the Entitled. He is an iconic figure in the world of sports. Please welcome Frank Deford. Frank, we're delighted to have you with us.
Thank you very much, Jim.
Now, in 1992, when Clinton ran the first time against George Bush Sr., the slogan was, "It's the economy, stupid." And now we see recently the abandonment for new plans for a stadium by the Florida Marlins. We see naming rights going begging in the Meadowlands. We see the NBA laying off 9% of the workforce. Can sports survive this economic downturn?
Well, I think it'll survive. I don't think there's any question about that. And by the way, it's a worldwide thing as well. I know that individual sports like tennis, golf, automobile racing, having a very difficult time getting sponsors now around the world. So this is nothing that's attributed to the United States. I think there's going to be problems, and I think fringe sports could go belly up. But I can't see...
What are fringe sports? Boxing?
Oh, you would have more difficulty getting boxing matches, for example, or even things that we think of as Olympic sports, who really depend on the kindness of strangers. Small sports, I'm just making these up, fencing, badminton, things of that nature. You're suddenly going to have trouble getting funding. I can also see colleges cutting back on those kind of small sports. Now, the colleges always have to keep Title IX in mind, which means if you cut one women's sport, you've got to cut one men's sport. But I think those might be the place where we're first going to see a diminution of sporting activity.
Is the problem made more difficult as we see at a time when people have less disposable income and less money to spend? Teams are asking for higher ticket prices, higher season prices, and even PSLs, with which you're familiar, where you've got to buy a license for the privilege
to get a seat. I've been amazed during the best of economic times at the rise in ticket prices. Just the average. I'm not talking about the guy buying the luxury box. I'm talking about somebody wanting to take his family out to a simple ball game, a baseball game in July, and the amount of money that he has to spend to buy tickets and then a couple of Cokes and so forth seems to me extraordinary. What's happened is a ball game used to be sort of like going to the movies. Hey, let's go to the game. And everyone would pick up and go to the game, and you'd buy a couple of seats and walk in. And now, a ball game has become like a Broadway show. It's something that you plan in advance. And so I've just been...
And seats more expensive than the Broadway show.
Yeah, they are in many respects. And I'm not talking about the $10,000 seats in the first row of the Lakers and so forth, those kind of extraordinary. I'm just talking about the regular reserve seats, which can be up in the hundreds of dollars now. And how the average Joe, we seem to be talking about Joes these days, the average Joe can afford
Joe the fan.
Yeah, Joe the fan can afford those tickets has amazed me for the past few years. Now that people are having trouble really making ends meet, I'm really worried about it, yes.
So was the personal seat license, the PSL, was that a smart strategy on the part of the owners or a dumb strategy?
I think it's smart.
You think it was smart?
I think it was smart because we had found that people were buying them. People would pay $5,000, $10,000. And remember,
even $400,000 at auction for
the very best. Yeah. And the Jets, the New York Jets, recently had an auction on eBay. They auctioned off, and this was after the crash, and still got some people were bidding, I think, $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 for the very best seats. Colleges have been selling seat licenses. Colleges have a very, very dicey situation in which all kinds of tax breaks are given to athletics. And I've always been sort of wondering when the hammer was going to hit there. But the trouble is that the judges and the legislatures in this country are sports fans too. And so everybody kind of looks the other way.
Well, who's going to buy the luxury boxes? Corporations? I mean, certainly not Lehman Brothers or AIG, Bear Stearns or WAMU.
I think even the companies that are doing well, who have not been terribly damaged by the events of the last few weeks, I think they're going to have second thoughts. I mean, can we really do this in this kind of climate? It's a bonus, and you know the word bonus has become very nasty in the last few weeks. Where do you cut back, particularly from a point of view of trying to make yourself look like you're running a tight ship to the stockholders? And I think the first place you cut back is with something like a big luxury box in sports. I don't think we're going to see that probably for another year or so, because so much of this has been committed ahead of time for the coming season. I think that basketball, even baseball for next year, is going to be relatively safe. But by 2010, 2011, I think we could see real financial problems in sports.
Do you think the demographic of the fan is going to change? I mean, I sort of have an image of a football fan being a blue-collar worker who likes a can of beer and a Frankfurter.
Several cans of beer.
Several cans of beer out at the stadium. And is it going to become like the finals of the U.S. Open, where everyone wears a coat and tie? And,
well, I think it may see it go in the other direction, because you may see a lowering of ticket prices, which are going to let more of the hoi polloi in. I think that's a possibility. I think what's happened is, and what people have complained about recently, is that the average guy is getting priced out. Maybe now it's going to be more demographic. You know, I made an observation, several years ago, that we always think of sports as a great community builder. It really is a leveler. You go to a ball game, or this anyway was always the case, and you might be sitting next to someone that you have absolutely nothing in common with in any other phase of your life, and yet you're totally wrapped up. You bond, and all of a sudden, with all of these luxury boxes and so forth, sports has become more stratified than the opera. I mean, it really has. Sports is in many respects the most elitist place you could go, an arena. Today, there are special seating sections where no one else can go except unless you have a ticket there. Well, that didn't used to be the case. A sport was a wonderful coming together. It was a town hall, a park, and we've lost a lot of that. Maybe we're going to get it back.
And you think that's because of the economics?
Absolutely. You could charge more and more money. In the same way that we've talked about, the CEO salaries have gone up exponentially from what the average worker was getting. In the same way, the best seat prices in stadiums have soared over the years, and so there's this huge differential between the average seat. That's not to say that the average seat hasn't gone up too, but you're talking about thousands of dollars for a lousy seat. I don't think any game in the world is worth that, particularly since you can see it on television.
Well, and the leagues have found even new, more ingenious ways of getting money from the fans. I mean, for example, internet scalping, like StubHub.com. Where instead of going to a scalper, which we used to do to get a hot ticket, you go online and you pay the commission to the league.
Well, I must say that what the leagues found out was, why should we allow the middleman to make all the money? If we're selling tickets for $30 and we know that scalpers are getting $50 for them, then that ticket is worth $50, and we can charge that. From that point of view, that was just simple business acumen, and in which the tickets on the open market were being priced below their real value. I can understand that. I think where the only place left that I can see that teams can start to make more money is gambling. There's very little gambling allowed in this country, illegal gambling on sports, only in Nevada. And you can't call into Nevada from any other state. And at some point, I would think that there would be the opportunity to allow gambling on sports, which would bring money into the teams the same way that horse racing. So I'm talking about betting on real games in the same way that you can bet on a horse race. And part of that money, the cut, goes back to the horse tracks and ultimately to the people who run the horses.
And also to the state.
And also, yeah, part of it goes to the state. And in a way, I know an awful lot of people are against gambling in all its forms, but it's been pretty much proven that the worst kind of gambling for the general population is what's allowed now, which is the slots and the lottery. They appeal to the people who can least afford to lose that sort of money. Sports gambling at least has the advantage of appealing, generally speaking, to people who have more disposable income. So far, we have resisted it. The amount of money that's spent on internet gambling around the world is absolutely extraordinary. They were fixing tennis matches not long ago. Who ever thought tennis matches had that much money bet on them? Hundreds of thousands of dollars on a first-round tennis match. So that money is just waiting there to be plucked. But so far, the sort of Puritan instincts of Americans have denied that opportunity.
But you'd favor legalization of internet gambling on sporting events?
I would, because it's the same as liquor prohibition. All that did was put the money in the pockets of the bootleggers. And all that the prohibition right now of sports gambling does is put it in the pockets of the bookies. And Jim, I'm not in any way delusionary. This is always going to mean, anytime you allow any vice, it's going to mean that some people are going to go overboard. And you allow people to drink, and you're going to have alcoholics. And you're going to have...
If you don't allow people to drink, you'll still have alcoholics.
You still have alcoholics, and perhaps you'll have more. But I think that is the... that is one place where America is behind the curve. It's allowed in practically every other place in the world, and I think it's a logical step. And I guess what I'm saying is, if you find sports revenues starting to go down, 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 I think there will be more pressure for that.
Well, one problem with the economics, of course, are the escalating players' salaries. I mean, Babe Ruth in his best year got $80,000. A-Rod is a $28 million a year contract with incentives built in. I mean, when is it going to stop?
What's crazy about sports salaries, if you compare it, say, to showbiz salaries, I don't know what Tom Cruise or Julia Roberts make for a movie, around $25 million. But that doesn't mean that the leading man or the leading lady playing opposite them makes $18 million. On the contrary, they say, well, we got Cruise for $25 million, so we can just bring in a good actress and give her, $1 million. Baseball doesn't work that way, and the other sports as well. Everybody tends to make money. Once one second baseman makes $14 million, then the agent comes and says, my guy's a second baseman too, and if $14 million is the going price for the best second baseman, then my guy should get $11 million, which is completely, out of whack. The A-Rods, yes, might it might be excused that they can make so much money because they draw fans. I think you're going to see, again, a diminution of the spear carrier salaries, the average journeymen, as we call them. I think that will start to go down and be harder to justify.
That'll be that offensive lineman who
that's right, who nobody knows his name.
Yeah.
And now, of course, football's got a better arrangement because football, the salaries aren't guaranteed. You sign a 5-year contract, but if they want to fire you after 2 weeks, I'm being a little glib here, but basically the other 4 years, you don't have to pay. You sign a 5-year contract in basketball, hockey, or baseball, and you cut the guy next week, you still owe him for the 5 years. And so probably would be fewer long-term contracts. I think that's something that's already sort of in the works. And probably at a certain point, the general salary scale is going to start to go down if there's not the money to support it.
Frank, what about scandal in sports? We're seeing so many instances of illegal steroid use, of Joba Chamberlain caught driving under the influence, and he apologizes to the fans for having let baseball down. When Britney Spears was caught driving under the influence, no one said she let Pop-Tarts down.
No, sir, she did not let showbiz down.
Showbiz down.
Of course, athletes have always been naughty. It's always been sort of understood that athletes were sort of the bad guys, the rogues. They got the cheerleaders, they were always attractive. But by the same token, they didn't sort of play by the same rules that the rest of us did, because we love athletes and give them a break. And particularly in the United States, I suppose, where this insane big-time athletics in college system has grown up, in which athletes are brought in, and it's pretty much of a known scandal that they don't go to class, or that they're passed along, and it's all complete fraud. And so there's a tendency, I think, in American sports more than anything else, to sort of forgive athletes. Now, you're talking about two different things. You're talking about a guy getting drunk off the field. John Daly, the golfer, was again picked up. I mean, he's a very sad case. There has been more violence. I've noticed that. There's been more violence, and not just boys being boys, but boys beating up girls. But as far as scandal on the field is concerned,
I mean, performance enhancement.
The drugs has been the main thing. As I say, there's been whispers recently about fixing in tennis. That got completely out of control, but I think maybe the lid has been put back on that. And remember, too, athletes are young. Young people are always the ones, young men, are always the ones who get in trouble. And you give them money, and you give them adulation. Jim, if you had given me $7 or $8 million when I was 25 years old, and I could have had just about any woman I wanted, and I was basking in all the spotlights in the world, I kind of think it would have gone to my head. I'm amazed in some respects that any of these guys get through as normal people.
Because it's a power trip.
Wow. And an awful lot of them come from modest or even impoverished circumstances. They've never had anything before, and all of a sudden this is thrown on them. And it's, as I say, it's extraordinary to me that more of them don't end up in trouble. I do think we always, everybody loves to attack agents as bad guys, because they're squeezing money from our team to give to this ungrateful athlete. And we all know the scenario. But agents have done a good job in the last generation or so of making sure that these athletes, most of them, are not allowed to buy 85 cars and 17 houses, and that they do save a certain amount of money. You don't run into those awful stories of athletes who just a few years before were the idols of America, who are now dead broke. Of course, you give people that much money at a young age, it's hard to spend it all. Millions of dollars. But that, I think, if there's one good thing that's come out of this, is that most athletes today, when their careers are over, they've made so much money that they should have a little bit that's stuck to their fingers.
Would you put an asterisk next to the number of home runs achieved by Barry Bonds or others who, Roger Clemens or others who've had enviable records? but who have been involved with steroids or other performing enhancing substances.
The asterisk is like a balloon in a cartoon. You know, all these guys have balloons, and the asterisk is there. You can't do it though. You can't draw a red line under these guys and say they did wrong, because it's too hard to prove, and B, it happened. We know that the 1919 World Series was fixed. Still in the record books. It can't be changed. You can't go back and rewrite history. But I think there's a general understanding, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I think there are an awful lot of people who really believe that Roger Maris is still the home run king with 61, which he hit back in 1961, and that anybody who's exceeded that in subsequent years was cheating, and Maris still deserves the title. And I think there are an awful lot of people who believe that Henry Aaron is still the lifetime home run king, and that what Bonds did was cheating. And people believe that, even though I don't think that anything can be changed in the record books.
So would you allow him to enter the Baseball Hall of Fame?
I don't have a vote.
If you did?
If I did. I wouldn't at first. I mean, I'm really going to sound like a politician. I'm really parsing this. But maybe after 10 years, if other guys started to get in, then you start to say, well, you know, even before he started taking those performance-enhancing drugs, even then he was a pretty good, you know, bet for the Hall of Fame. So
I think you could make that case with Barry Bonds.
Maybe we should let bygones be bygones. And so what I think is, I think that history is going to change. Our attitudes about these guys is going to change over time, and I would not be surprised to see Bonds end up in the Hall of Fame, any more so than O.J. Simpson went into the Hall of Fame before he did what he did. But damn it, he was a great football player, and that's what Halls of Fames are for. And Bonds was a great baseball player before he began to do what he did.
But of course, there's always such a double standard. For the Football Hall of Fame, it expressly states that off-field conduct is not to be taken into account. For Baseball Hall of Fame, we certainly have excluded Pete Rose. We've excluded, you spoke of the Chicago World Series, the Black Sox. The shoeless Joe Jackson has never made it. After what, 90 years?
He was given a lifetime ban. Only baseball could continue a lifetime ban 50 years after a guy has left the lifetime.
That's it.
I mean, it's inexcusable, by the way, that Rose is not in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
Because what Rose did, gambling on games, he did after his playing career was over. So I think it's just cynical and hypocritical to keep Rose out. I mean, there are an awful lot of guys in the Hall of Fame who do not live up to the highest standards of humanity.
Well, you have Ty Cobb certainly didn't.
Was a dreadful creature. A guy named Cap Anson, going back in the 19th century, was largely responsible for African Americans being booted out of baseball. There were a lot of rotters, but they were real good ball players. No. And my attitude is, if you're a real good ball player, you let him into the Hall of Fame. We'll let Sage Peter decide whether you get into heaven.
Mickey Mantle is in the Hall of Fame, and they say in the good old days he took an amphetamine or two to...
Well, everybody used to take greenies. They were called greenies. You'd come into a ballpark and they were like M&Ms. And you could grab a bunch of greenies and get you through the season. Baseball doesn't look as if it's that hard a game. You know, it's leisurely, you're playing right field, you don't get a ball for 2 or 3 innings. But man, you're playing it every day. And it is, in that sense, it's really a more grueling game than any other. It's just the drip, drip, drip of it. I mean, for Cal Ripken to have done what he did, I think is one of the most extraordinary physical achievements in all of humankind. Yeah. And a lot of those guys needed amphetamines, not just Mickey Mantle. If Mickey had drunk as much and caroused as much as they said he did, I don't think that he could have hit 500 and some home runs. I think that the reputation there exceeds the reality.
Now let's talk for a minute about the Olympics. You've referred to it. I don't know, 12 years ago you won an Emmy for covering the Olympics in Seoul. But recently you've been quoted as saying, you can keep the Olympics, I'll take the NFL. You've been critical of it, particularly the last round in Beijing. How do you feel about the Olympics?
Well, I think in some respects the Olympics are an anachronism. I mean, when they started more than 100 years ago, the modern Olympics, they were based on the old Greek model, which is every 4 years. Well, you know, we have jet planes now, Jim. You know, we can get places pretty quick. We don't have to have this 4-year interim between the games. It doesn't, to me, make sense anymore that you should have world championships on this quadrennial basis. Similarly, the amount of money that goes into supporting the Olympics, the infrastructure, not just in Beijing, which is exceptional, but the amount of money that will be spent in London, which may be spent in 2016 if Chicago gets the games, which has a very good chance, seems to me to be outlandish. I think you'd be much better off having the track championships over here and the swimming championships over here, and the idea that you have to bring everybody together in one place, I just think is an anachronism and unnecessary. And that's not to say that, to add on to that, the Olympics have been corrupt for so very long, run basically by a bunch of rich Europeans who used to be lords and dukes and earls more than anything else, and tried to support the amateur ideal, which has no more basis in reality. I mean, it's one of the same. The amateurism is like communism. It looks good on paper, but it doesn't work. And at least the Olympics have acknowledged that the day of the amateur is finished in most sports.
I want to ask you about your reflections on being a sports writer. Red Smith, who our icon, said it's easy to be a sports writer. You just sit down at a typewriter and open a vein. Is it as easy as that? And do you open a vein when you write?
Wait, he said, wait for the little beads of blood to appear on your forehead.
Yeah.
Of course, that's deadline writing. Yeah. And I think deadline writing is difficult under any circumstances, and we're seeing more and more of it because of the internet. You don't get the time to cogitate and think. I think if there's anything to be said about modern sports writing, I think there are more good writers writing sports today than ever before. I mean, it was always something that people tended to look down on, the toy shop. There was always very good writing in sports, though, because it's a subject that lends itself to good writing. It's drama. It's competition. It's a subject that everybody loves. It deals with young people who are bright and fresh and handsome. I mean, sports has, you know, everything that makes it attractive. I think, unfortunately, though, because of the power of the internet, sports writing has become mostly a sort of modern Morse code. It's X's and O's and who's going to win and who's ahead and who's got the edge and strategy, and that the writing is not as good as it used to be. I think the writers are there with the potential, but they're not allowed to write as well as they could in Red Smith's time, or when my old magazine, Sports Illustrated, was in its heyday. It was an absolutely wonderfully written magazine.
I think we have to wrap up, and I think what you're saying is that, in answer to my initial question, that the sports bubble is not about to burst. And I wanted to thank you for coming by, Frank Deford. This has been marvelous. And thank you for coming by. Tune in next week for more on the digital age. For the digital age, I'm Jim Zirin. Good night, and all the best.